Now, in Ross chapter 10, 10.5, and we see this on page 89 in the textbook, we come to the matter of translating the perfect conjugation in the cow perfect. And actually, this is a matter of the conjugation that's the perfect for any stem. Remember, there are 7 stems. We talked about that in the Hebrew verbal system. So how do we translate the perfect conjugation? In biblical Hebrew, there are 2 main conjugation patterns that Hebrew verbs follow. The perfect conjugation, which we are learning here in Ross chapter 10, and then the imperfect conjugation, which we will be tackling in Ross chapter 17. The use of a conjugation pattern determines the speaker's or writer's portrayal or conception of the verbal action. This is known as its aspect. Aspect is a semantic category that belongs to verbs, and to put it very simply, the perfect conjugation portrays an event as a bounded or self-contained whole. And this is called perfective aspect. And the imperfect conjugation in Hebrew portrays an event as unbounded or open-ended or in progress. This is called imperfective aspect. I have a chart here that might be helpful for us. Perfective aspect here is demonstrated by the sentence, Moses ate a mutton burger. Moses ate a mutton burger. And we're focusing here on the verb ate. This verb, the choice to use the simple past verb ate here, is a matter of perfective aspect. And what this verb ate indicates is that the verb's portrayal is self-contained and bounded. The choice to use perfective aspect then is a choice to portray the action Moses ate as a bounded whole, or in summary fashion without reference to the way it unfolds in time, and without reference to anything that happened between the beginning and the end of the action or the event. So I'm not talking about the beginning of the action. I'm not talking about the end of the action. Neither of those is in view. I'm just giving you a kind of a summary snapshot of the action. Moses ate a mutton burger. Now, the imperfective aspect could be demonstrated by choosing a progressive tense in English. Moses was eating a mutton burger. Here, the action is open-ended or unbounded. To describe it as my handout has it, the choice to use imperfective aspect, Moses was eating, is a choice to portray an action that has begun but without reference to its conclusion. Thus, it is open-ended rather than self-contained. It's open-ended rather than self-contained. So if I say, hey, Moses was eating a mutton burger, we know that the action has begun, but we're not saying anything about its completion or about the action as the whole action. We're rather sort of getting ourselves into the action as it's unfolding. There's no focus or attention drawn to its completion. So this is open-ended or unbounded. And you can see the difference here. Moses ate a mutton burger. I'm thinking of that as a whole act. Moses was eating a mutton burger, perhaps when something happened. Now note here that biblical Hebrew's conjugation patterns, the perfect conjugation and the imperfect conjugation, do not signify tense. Okay? This is not an aspect of biblical Hebrew verbal system. It does not signify tense. Most languages that we know here in the West are what we call tense prominent languages, and the verbal forms do encode tense. English and Spanish being examples, and others that we could point out. Biblical Hebrew's verbal system is what we like to call an aspect prominent system. Aspect is what we're talking about, how the verb's action is being portrayed. It's an aspect prominent system, not a tense prominent one. But at the same time, biblical Hebrew frequently employs the perfect conjugation to describe past time events, but the imperfect conjugation to describe non-past time events, events that are present or future. And we'll see more of this in Ross chapter 17 when we get to the imperfect conjugation. But here is a chart that might be helpful as well. Thinking now in terms of the actual form, and that's why I'm not just saying perfect aspect, or perfective aspect, but the perfect conjugation, which does indicate perfective aspect. And we have Pakad Moshe Bayit. Moses visited a house. Okay, so visited, Moses, subject, a house, direct object. Here, we're translating Pakad, which is a perfect conjugation verb in Hebrew, as a simple past time action, because in the perfect conjugation, that is commonly the case. The imperfect conjugation, and you don't know this form yet, but it uses prefixes instead of suffixes only to indicate the subject. Yifkod Moshe Bayit, same sentence structure, except I have an imperfect form right here. This means Moses will visit a house. The imperfect conjugation is frequently used for non-past time events. All right? So we will often translate them that way when we have absolutely no context. Perfect verbs, usually with past. Imperfect verbs with non-past sort of semantics, as in present or future. And we have a little bit more that we can say about it. So let's look at the next page here. How should we translate biblical Hebrew sentences with perfect conjugation verbs? There are a number of ways that Ross talks about here, and these will be based on context and the verb's semantics. So first of all, we could, if we come to a perfect verb, a Hebrew perfect verb, translate it with a simple past time English verb. And this will be our most common option. This is kind of what your default's going to be when you meet a perfect conjugation verb in Hebrew. So if we take the verb nafal, which is one of your new verbs in this chapter, so you'll look in your vocabulary list, you'll see nafal, we have the sentence nafal Moshe. Perfect of nafal, fell, Moses, subject. So Moses fell. Simple past time English verb will be a standard way to translate these. But we're told in Ross, secondly, that we could use English's perfect tenses to translate a cal-perfect verb in Hebrew. And this is going to be contextually dependent. That is, if the verbal action that the cal-perfect represents has some ongoing relevance to the time of speaking or to some other reference time, we could use one of the English perfect tenses. What are some of the English perfect tenses? Well, the present perfect. The present perfect is where you have something like X has blanked. Okay? X has spanked. John has spanked his child. X has spoken. So John has spoken. We have eaten. So usually ed or d or en are used for these sorts of forms of present perfect. Past perfect would be things like X had blanked or blanken. So John had spoken, John had worked, and so forth. Okay? Now, let's look at a couple of examples here of these in Hebrew. I'm using a kind of dialogue structure here just to set the context, because I've told you that using the perfect tenses can be contextually dependent. So if someone asks, person A asks, why isn't Moses here? Like right now, why isn't Moses here? My answer could be, Nafal Moshe. Notice that was what I set up here in this first example. There I translated it as Moses fell. But if contextually I'm asking a question like, why isn't Moses here? And someone says, Nafal Moshe, then I would probably want to translate that with a present perfect tense form in English. Moses has fallen. In other words, he fell, and his falling has some ongoing relevance to the time now that you're asking me, why isn't he here now? He has fallen. Okay? But if, on the other hand, I'm asking a question about something that happened in the past, like, yesterday I went to the football game, and I noticed that Moses wasn't there. Why wasn't Moses there yesterday? Yesterday is my reference time. Then an answer could be, Nafal Moshe. That is to say, Moses had fallen. Here I'd use the past perfect, because sometime before yesterday, at the game. Moses had fallen before that time, and so his falling prior has ongoing relevance to the time that that question was asked. Why wasn't Moses there yesterday? Because Moses had fallen. Nafal Moshe. So notice that all of these verb forms are CalPerfect 3MS forms. They're all using the perfect conjugation, and it's just context dependent whether I use the simple past, Moses fell, or the present perfect, Moses has fallen, or the past perfect, Moses had fallen. And then thirdly, you can use at times a present tense form in English, and this is going to be based on one of a couple of factors. If lexically, if in terms of the verb's root letters and its meaning, if lexically the verb is stative, which is to say if it indicates the subject's state, disposition, experience, or mental activity, then the perfect verb in Hebrew can be translated as a present tense form in English. So think of the verb zachar. Zachar means to remember. And what is remembering? Remembering is an experience, as it were, or a mental activity. And so, if I use the perfect of zachar, I could translate that as past. So, zacharta, that's the perfect 2MS form in the Cal. That could be you, man, remembered, if the context is past. But if I'm in a present tense context and I'm using a stative verb like this, then I could also translate this as you remember. You remember. So either of those would be appropriate renderings for the perfect. Now, secondly, B, contextually, we could use present tense for verbs where the assertion is habitually or proverbially true. In such situations, the present tense in English can be used also. So, setting up a context here, if maybe I'm a newcomer to Israel, and I notice that these people are never fighting with their enemies, I would say, hey, why don't you war against other people? And the answer could be a habitually or proverbially true statement using the perfect conjugation. And here I'm using the perfect first common plural, yashavnu b'shalom. Why don't you war? Yashavnu b'shalom. Well, because we dwell in peace. Notice that in this context, the perfect, which normally could be translated as past, could be rendered present tense because this is a habitually or proverbially true kind of statement. Yashavnu b'shalom. We dwell in peace. So those are ways to translate the Hebrew perfect tense or perfect conjugation. Now let's go to 10.6 here. We deal with the sign of the accusative, or I like to call this the direct object marker. If a biblical Hebrew verb is transitive, then that means it's going to take a direct object. Okay, you may not know the word transitive here. So transitive is a feature of verbs where the verb selects or takes a direct object, and it needs one to be used grammatically. Most grammars describe the direct object function of a noun as accusative. Accusative. So when the direct object in biblical Hebrew is definite, then it will commonly be prefixed with the particle eth, with the sere, or et, with the makaf. And the difference in form here is simply because, remember, when we add a makaf to a word, it loses its stress. So eth, without a makaf, has a sere, which is a long I-class vowel. But when I put the makaf here, it surrenders its stress, and it's now closed and unaccented, and Hebrew requires, yes, the cuss rule, closed unaccented syllables require a short vowel, and so my sere, which is a long I-class vowel, shortens to a short I-class vowel, which is segal. Now, some call this particle the sign of the accusative. Remember, accusative function is the direct object function, or at least an accusative function is the direct object function. So Ross calls this the sign of the accusative. A noun is considered definite if it is a proper noun. So a noun names a particular person, place, or thing. So Moses, the Golden Gate Bridge, Mississippi, right? These are proper nouns. It's also definite if it's articular, if the definite article is attached. So the horse is not any old horse, but a specific horse. Or if the noun has a pronoun, his horse, my horse. Okay, again, these are specific horses. Any of these things can render a noun definite. And if the direct object is definite, then we will see frequently the et particle prefixed right before that definite direct object. Now, if the direct object is not definite, it will not be preceded by the form or a form of et. Now, let me just make one comment here. If I have a definite direct object, Hebrew frequently puts this particle in front of it, but it does not always put it in front of it. And so there will be times when you will have a definite direct object, but there's no particle et. You still need to translate that as and analyze it as a direct object, okay? We frequently see the et particle not present, absent, in Hebrew poetry. That's a common place to find it. But in prose, you may have a direct object that doesn't have the sign of the accusative either. Okay. Now, important note here about translating. The particle eighth is a function word. It's merely a function word and only serves to signal a definite direct object is coming or is here. Do not translate the word eighth when it is a direct object marker. So let's look at some examples of sentences with direct objects. I have first, and you can repeat after me, Shafat ha'ish am. Shafat ha'ish am. Here I have he judged, and I have my subject, ha'ish, the man judged, and here's my direct object, am. Now notice that am as the direct object has no article. It is not articular, and it's not a proper noun. So even though it's the direct object, I don't have the particle et in front of it. It is still the direct object, though, and notice my English translation does render it in such a way where my English word order puts the subject first and the direct object after the verb. That's what English sentences typically do. The man judged a people. Now, the second sentence, I have now the direct object marker et, and notice that it is in front of a direct object that is definite. Shafat ha'ish, as we had before, but now et ha'am, or with the makef et ha'am. The man judged not a people, but the people. And notice that in my translation, I do not translate this. The man judged the people. Do not translate the eighth, okay? It is simply telling you I have a direct object that's definite coming right after me. The man judged the people. Next examples. We have Zachar, one of our new verbs from this chapter, to remember. Zachar hamelech sus. The king remembered, and here's my direct object, a horse. Not the horse, a horse, because it's not definite. There's no definite direct object marker before. Over here, Zachar hamelech ate hasus. Notice I have the definite direct object marker because what the king remembered is a definite noun. It's articular. The king remembered the horse. Do not translate ate here. Next, Zachar hamelech ate Adonai. This example is here to remind you that you don't simply have a definite noun if you have the article on it. You can have a definite noun if the noun is a proper noun. So the king remembered a person, specifically remembered Yahweh. And then finally, we have an example from Genesis 1:1. Bara Elohim, God created, ate hashemayim ve'et haaretz. Here, when you have a compound direct object, Hebrew will frequently write the direct object marker twice before each part of the compound direct object. God created two things that are definite, the heavens and the earth. Okay, the last section here of our chapter is 10.7. It's the syntax of verbal sentences. Really, it's a matter of what sort of word order should I expect when I have a verbal sentence, and how do I negate verbs, the verbal part of the sentence. Now, there's some debate about what standard word order in Biblical Hebrew is. Many believe that the normal word order is verb, subject, object. That is to say, verbs first, then subject, then object. Now, from right to left, in Hebrew, the verb will be on the far right, and then the subject after it, and then the object, okay? So in my English order, I'm putting the V in front of the S, but remember, we flip these things in Hebrew. Now, if the subject or the object is fronted, that is to say, if it's placed before the verb, it is to give that subject or object marked focus. And one example of marked focus is what we call contrastive focus. As in something like this: I love pizza, direct object is pizza. Lima beans, that's my direct object, but now I'm putting it at the front of the sentence. Lima beans I hate. So I'm contrasting my love for pizza with my hatred for lima beans. Now, let's go back to the prior clauses and look at a couple of these just for that verb, subject, object, word order. Notice that I had shafat, ha'ish, am. Verb was first, subject was second, and then that object, that direct object, was third, right? Shafat, ha'ish, et ha'am. Verb, subject, and again, direct object. This is definite though, so I've got that particle in front. I don't want to, beat a dead horse here, but I just wanted you to see that that's the case here. Now, how does biblical Hebrew negate verbs? We've talked about, how people judged someone. The king or the man judged the people. How do I say that he didn't do it? Well, Hebrew has a negative particle that means not, and it's the word lo, and it can be spelled one of these two ways. Lo with the holem vav, or lo just with the holem and the vav missing, the mater. Remember, when I have a historically long vowel and the mater is missing, that is called defective spelling. And what's interesting is that many times the defective spelling of a word ends up being the more commonly used form. So don't think of defective spelling as unusual or rare. Often the defective spelling can be the more common spelling. And here you will see not usually with a lamed holem and just a simple a lamed holem aleph with a simple holem. Okay, you're going to put the lo right before the verb when you want to negate it. So shafat ha'ish et ha'am, the man judged the people. How do we say he didn't? Lo shafat ha'ish et ha'am. Lo shafat ha'ish et ha'am, the man did not judge the people. And finally, keep in mind that Hebrew verbs agree with their subject in person, gender, and number. The personal ending, or what I also like to call the inflectional markings, these are agreement features of the verb that must reflect the subject noun. So if the subject's third masculine singular, the verb needs to be third masculine singular. If the subject is a second feminine singular you, then the verb needs to be a second feminine singular you. Okay? Now, if the subject is overt or explicit, then it's going to be translated as your subject in the English sentence. If there is no overt subject, though, that is to say, if you have a null subject, null means not there, it's not explicit. If you have a null subject, not an overt subject or a covert subject, then the inflectional marking provides the implied subject, and you should use the appropriate pronoun as your English subject. So I've got two sentences by way of contrast here. Yarada, from yarad, to go down. Yarada, notice that's a perfect third feminine singular personal ending. Yarada ha'isha, the woman went down. La nahar, to the river. Now, since my subject is overt, then I'm going to use that subject in my translation as the subject here. The woman went down. But in the next sentence, Yarada la nahar, that's 3FS, but there is no overt subject. Just got my verb, and I have a prepositional phrase here, but no overt subject. So I'm going to use the 3FS marking to understand that the subject is a she, and I'm going to use that as my subject here in my English sentence. She went down to the river. I can't just translate that as went down to the river. I have to use the 3FS pronoun she in my rendering. Okay?